Right, so good morning everyone, or good day. Okay, so for today class, we will be discussing naman about the LADMERT system. So basically class, this is the system that describes the entire pharmacokinetics, actually buong pharmacology na eh. Okay, so as you all know class, or if you can remember, okay, whenever we discuss class the LADMERT system, oftentimes class, what's associated with pharmacokinetics is simply the ADME. This part here, okay? This one is associated with pharmacokinetics. R and T would refer to response and toxicity. Oftentimes, class would refer naman to the pharmacodynamic aspect of pharmacology. Okay, while L here, liberation, this is more on biopharmaceutics, meaning how do we design a dosage form that will make sure that a drug enters the bloodstream or will have high amounts in the bloodstream. So this one's more on biopharmaceutics. Because class, as defined, liberation is simply the event where a drug is released from its dosage form. So meaning it becomes in its, it will convert itself into its active form and then allow itself to enter the bloodstream and then ultimately class go to the target sites. If you can remember class, one of the assumptions that we have here in pharmacokinetics, so specifically the kinetic homogeneity theory, is that whatever the amount of drug entering the bloodstream is also the amount of drug that will be able to bind to the respective receptors or target sites. Okay, so of course class, with clinical pharmacokinetics, okay, we will be focusing more on the ADME aspect of the LADMERT system. But it's nice to know class the different processes that comprises the LADMERT system. So for today class, our main objective are as follows. So first is to describe the LADMERT system. Second is to describe and understand the importance of bioavailability. Right? So third is to describe volume distribution, its importance, differentiate models from compartments, and differentiate one compartment model from two compartment model. Now, it's important class we understand kasi the compartment models so that we will be able to have a visualization in our mind of what happens to a drug once it starts to enter the body. Okay, as it is absorbed, if it's an extravascularly administered medication, okay, what happens to the plasma concentration, the drug plasma concentration as the drug is being metabolized and excreted, how fast. Okay, all these things class can be visualized using the compartment models. May it be one or two compartment model. Now, let's first talk about class the first aspect of the LADMERT system, which is liberation. So normally class, when we have a dosage form, oftentimes it's composed of two parts. Okay, you have your excipients, could be a bulk adding agent, could be a solubilizing agent, whatever. Okay, basta class, excipients are components of a medication that has no pharmacologic effect. And of course, class, the one with the pharmacologic effect would be the active drug. Now, the process of liberation class is simply defined as when when a drug separates itself from the dosage form or from the excipients. So simply put class, it's the process in which a drug is released from its dosage form. Now, normally, class, we know that the active drug is released from its dosage form once the drug is already existing in its solution form. That's the reason why, class, solutions do not undergo liberation because they are already in their liberated states. Okay, a tablet will undergo liberation. Okay, a capsule will undergo liberation. Pero a solution class will not because it's already in its liberated state. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Now, why is it necessary, class, that a drug must exist in its solution form? So that, class, it will be ready for the next step in the process of the LADMER system, which is absorption. Now, just something, class, that you have to take note of. Okay, once the drug is absorbed, okay, once a drug is absorbed, it is simultaneously metabolized, distributed, and excreted all at the same time. So while some parts of the drug are being absorbed, okay, immediately, class, some of the drugs are already excreted, metabolized, and distributed all throughout the body. So all of these processes, the ADME processes, class, all happen simultaneously. It's not one step at a time wherein tatapusin muna yung absorption bago mag-distribute. Or after distribution, saka pa lang siya mag-metabolize. No. All of these things are occurring simultaneously within the body. Alright? So, why a drug must first be liberated or must exist in its solution form so that it can be ready for the next step, which is absorption. Now, one of the major requirements, class, for a drug to be absorbed is that it should be water soluble. Okay, a drug must be water soluble. For one main reason lang naman, class, blood is 90% water. So, it only makes sense that for medications to be absorbed into the blood or to be able to dissolve into the blood, they must be water soluble. Okay? Kaya nga, class, ang kinagandahan kasi ng gamot natin, most of our drugs, class, are classified as weak electrolytes. Okay, meaning a drug can exist as a weak acid or a weak base. Now, what is the property ba, class, of a weak electrolyte? Okay, actually, most of our medications available in the market are weak acids. Okay, ilan lang yung weak bases. Okay, na bakit weak electrolyte yung mga gamot natin? Ang kinagandaan kasi, class, ng pagiging weak electrolyte ng isang gamot is because it's partially ionized and it's partially unionized. Meaning, one part of a drug is ionized, while the other part, yan, is unionized. So, ito yung unionized portion. Okay, ito naman yung ionized portion. Yan. Okay. Now, class, ano ang benefit nito? Ano ang benefit ng pagiging weak electrolyte ng isang gamot? So, the partially unionized portion, class, makes it lipid soluble, while the partially ionized portion of the drug makes it water soluble. So, meaning you get the best of both worlds. Okay? Now, class, why is it ideal that a drug must exist in its weak electrolyte state? Because, class, the ionized portion of the drug allows it to dissolve, okay? Allows drug to dissolve in the blood. Kasi sabi natin, primary requirement for a drug to be absorbed into the body is that it should be water soluble. So, the water soluble part of a drug, okay, makes it dissolve, allows the drug to dissolve in the bloodstream. While the lipid-soluble portion, class, of the drug allows drug to enter cells. Again, bakit? Kasi if you can remember, class, a cell is encapsulated or enclosed by the cell membrane. And the cell membrane, class, is lipid. Okay, it's a lipid. So therefore, class, since may lipid portion ng ating gamot, okay, part of it is lipid soluble. Okay, that lipid soluble part of the drug, class, allows it to enter into the cell via diffusion lang. Okay, simply diffusion lang. Okay, because it will just easily it will easily pass through the cell membrane. Okay, because of the lipid of the unionized portions of the drug. Okay, that's why, class, pH plays a vital role in how a drug is absorbed. So, as discussed in your excuse me, as discussed in your Pharm 5, okay, sa Biopharmaceutics and Pharmacokinetics, yung basic Biopharmaceutics and Pharmacokinetics niyo. Okay, kaya nga, di ba, hindi-discuss natin Henderson-Hasselbalch equation because the pH, class, can greatly alter how ionized a drug is or how unionized a drug is. Okay? So, exposing a weak electrolyte, class, in an acid environment, okay, can greatly alter how water-soluble your drug is or how lipid-soluble your drug is. Right? Kasi electrolytes are very sensitive to pH changes. A simple change in their pH, class, in the pH of the medium where they are dissolving to, okay, can greatly alter whether or not they'll exist in their ionized state or their unionized state. So, we won't discuss that anymore here. Okay, I'm pretty sure sawang-sawa na kayong pakinggan yun sa Pharm 5 ninyo. Okay, so right now, class, we'll just talk about the applications of these things. Right? So, yun. Okay, let's just... Ay, mali. Okay. So, burahin muna natin to saglit. And so that we can proceed with absorption. So now we have a good background on how drugs work, what are the requirements prior to drug absorption, and so on and so forth. Okay, so again, class, liberation prepares your medications, your drugs, okay, to exist in their solution state so that they will be ready for absorption. And another thing that you have to take note of, absorption, class, distribution, metabolism, excretion, they all happen simultaneously. Right? So meaning, walang nauuna. Okay? They all happen simultaneously. So absorption. So let's have here a scenario, an example scenario, class. So a patient here takes their medicine. Okay, it's still in their solid dosage form. It's in their tablet form. Now, class, it enters into the GI tract, ultimately into the major site of absorption, which will be, the drug will still first stay in the stomach. Okay, undergo disintegration, dissolution, and then ultimately, class, dissolution is the process at which a drug is converted to solution form. So therefore, dissolution process is a requirement for liberation. Yeah. So here we have the tablet class. It undergoes disintegration and then ultimately dissolution to release the drug. Okay, to release the active form of the drug. So it becomes into its solution form. Once it becomes into its solution form, class, okay, active drug starts to enter the small intestines, so the small bowels, right? So, class, once the active drug in its release state, in its solution form, enters the small intestines, okay, it will then be ready, class, for absorption. Now, the only time we consider a drug to be absorbed is when it enters the bloodstream. Okay? If a drug is just at the tip of your tongue, andyan lang yung drug, okay, it's not considered absorbed. The only time, class, will consider a drug to be absorbed is when it enters the bloodstream. That's the reason why, class, drugs given intravenously are said to bypass absorption, because it didn't undergo the process at which drug has to be liberated, drug has to be absorbed into the absorbing site, and then enter the bloodstream. Wala yun for IV drugs. That's why, class, IV drugs are said to bypass absorption process. And that's the reason why, class, you'll never find a solid dosage form that's given intravenously. Okay, because again, primary requirement for a drug to be absorbed should be existing in solution form. So we only give IV drugs in their solution form. Kahit powder yan, i-reconstitute mo na yan and made into solution form so that it can be absorbed into the circulatory system. Make sense? So a few reminders. So yes, that drug must first be in its aqueous form before it can be absorbed. So a drug in its aqueous form is normally a drug in its solution form. Solution form, ibig sabihin, nag-undergo na siya ng liberation. Right? With a few exceptions, of course. There's always exception to the rules. So we have, class, drugs undergoing endocytosis or pinocytosis. Endocytosis like pinocytosis and phagocytosis. Okay? Yung mga gamot na yun, class, normally don't undergo, they don't need to be in their aqueous form to be absorbed. Kaya classic example of these drugs that undergoes endocytosis are the ADEK, the vitamins A, D, E, K. Okay, these are fat-soluble vitamins. Okay, so fat-soluble vitamins, class, like the vitamins A, D, E, K, they don't need to exist in their aqueous state. So recta, absorb agad sa katawan natin via endocytosis. Now, what's the term commonly used to describe the rate and extent of drug input? So it's defined as bioavailability. So bioavailability, class, is simply defined as the relative amount of drug from an administered dosage form which enters, here's the keyword, enters the systemic circulation and the rate at which the drug appears in the bloodstream. Okay, so simply put, class, bioavailability is a pharmacokinetic parameter designed to determine how fast and how much of the drug is entering the bloodstream as it's being absorbed. Make sense? Okay. So, class, of course, the faster a drug is absorbed, the faster will the drug appear in the bloodstream. And the faster the drug appears in the bloodstream, the faster will be its pharmacologic effect. So that only makes sense. And of course, the more drug that enters the bloodstream, then there will also be an equal increase, okay, in the effects or the pharmacologic effect of the medication, okay, as explained in our kinetic homogeneity theory. Right? Yeah. Pero again, remember, kinetic homogeneity theory is not absolute. Okay, pwede siyang, what do you call this? Okay, there are exceptions to the rule. Okay, there are exceptions to the rule. All right. Okay, so here's an example class of the plasma level time curve. You will be exposed to many plasma level time curves class in this course. Okay, for the reason that this is what we use when we're monitoring, whenever we're performing TDM or therapeutic drug monitoring. We try to look at the concentrations of a drug, okay, and determine whether or not the drug is producing toxicities or not. All right? So yeah. So class, here's an example of a plasma level time curve, and looking at this graph class, you can already assume two things. All right? One, actually, let's make it three things. Okay, one class, the drug is administered extravascularly. Vascular administration. Okay, medyo generalize ko pa, kasi hindi ko alam kung baka may subcutaneous ito, intradermal, oral, okay, or per oral, transdermal probably. Okay, hindi ko pa alam yun. Kaya i-ano natin. Basta at least alam ko kung anong klaseng administration ang ginawa sa kanya. A basic idea. So I know it's extravascularly administered. I know that one dose was given. Okay, and I know class that the drug took effect. Huwag nang took, had an effect. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3. Just by looking at the graph alone. How did I determine class that it's extravascularly administered? I was able to determine that class because there is the existence of an absorption phase. May absorption phase tayo. At alam naman natin class na extravascularly administered drugs are the only ones with an absorption phase. If it's intravascularly administered kasi class, the Cmax or the concentration class at 0 time. Here's the 0 time nga pala. Here's 0 time and then papunta sa kung anong oras man yan. Then the y-axis nga pala is for the concentration. So obviously. So from 0 to higher concentration. Okay? Makikita nyo dito class, umangat yung plasma level time curve natin. Umangat siya. So that indicates that there's an absorption phase. The existence of an absorption phase class tells me that it's extravascularly administered. Could be per oral, for all I know. Okay, pero I'm sure it's not intravascular. Because if it's given intravascularly class, at 0 time, the concentration will be at its highest. And then it's just going to be eliminated following a first order process. So that's an IV drug. Okay, so may absorption phase. So IV drugs class do not have absorption phases. Okay? Excuse me. So wala siyang absorption phase dapat. Kasi nga sabi natin, intravenously administered medications bypass absorption phase, and therefore they have 100% bioavailability. Right? So that's one thing. Okay, I know one dose lang ang binigay. Bakit? I only see one Cmax here. There's only one Cmax. If it's given multiple times kasi class, you'll see multiple Cmax. Every time you give a new dose, a new Cmax will be produced. So it would usually look something like this. So usually bibigay ka ng Cmax ng bagong dose bago pa tuluyang mawala ang gamot sa katawan to sustain its effect. Okay, so usually itsura niyan ganito. Until you reach steady state concentrations. Okay? So yun siya. Until steady state concentrations are reached, it will appear like this. Okay, your plasma level time curve will look something like this. Okay, yung paangat ng paangat ng paangat. Right? Now, another thing that I know class for a fact, just by simply looking at the graph, I know that the drug took effect for one main reason. It went above the MEC. Remember kasi MEC is the minimum effective concentration. MTC would be the minimum toxic concentration. Our goal, okay, in clinical pharmacokinetics class, our goal as a pharmacist, sorry, hindi lang sa course na to. Okay, ang goal natin class as a pharmacist is to make sure my drug reaches the MEC, the faster the better. Pero again, it depends on the type of drug you're using. Okay, pero generally, class, we want the drug to reach the MEC so that we know for a fact that my medication is working. Okay, that my medication is taking effect and my patient is benefiting from the drug. Right? Now, of course, class, if you want to maintain the effect, you want to add more drugs to it. Okay, you want to add more doses to it. Therefore, class, you administer the drug multiple times at a specified interval. Okay, yung interval na yung class is just enough to keep the plasma concentration at the therapeutic range, but not too fast, wherein lalagpas na siya sa MTC. Or not too slow to the point na nawawala-wala ang drug sa MEC or nawawala-wala ang drug sa therapeutic window. So, at the right amount, just to keep the concentration of the drug within the therapeutic window. Alright? So, those are the things that I can assume here. What else? Okay, onset time. So, alam niyo naman, class, di ba, that the only time a drug will have an effect is when the drug reaches the MEC. That's the reason why, class, IV drugs work fast, immediately for that matter, because at 0 time, it's already at its highest concentration. And just, swerte mo lang kung yung highest concentration yan is already above the MEC, but not beyond the MTC. Kaya mas delikado kadalasan ng mga IV drugs eh. Kasi, pag nakamali ka ng dose at 0 time, you'll see an effect. Agad-agad. Right? So, yun. And of course, we want the drug class to stay on the MEC if you want to sustain its effect. But if you only want the effect of the drug to be saglit lang, like say, for example, local anesthetics, you don't want the effect to last too long. Okay? So, therefore, class, you just usually give 1 dose. Then after a while, it's going to go down. Okay? The concentration of the drug will go down. So this is what we call the elimination phase. Okay, meaning elimination phase, class, is the combination of both metabolism and excretion. Okay, so the drug is being metabolized and excreted at the same time. Kasi one of the requirements for a drug to be excreted, it must first be biotransformed. Pero there are drugs, class, that can be eliminated in their unchanged states. Okay, just so you know, so they can just undergo rectang excretion agad. Okay, so metabolism, excretion. So that's the elimination phase. So class, as time goes by, okay, drug will be eliminated and its effect will stop to work. Okay, so mawawala yung effect niya, class, once the drug is already below the MEC. Alright? Okay, so those are the things that I can assume here. Now let's just erase this. Okay. Right. So again, class, this type of graph is very important because it gives us a rough idea what's happening inside the body. Normally, class, you'll just determine, okay, if you still remember one in our introduction part, okay, whenever you're determining, class, the amount of drug in the body, okay, for therapeutic drug monitoring, you want to determine it at the steady state concentration. Kasi dyan sa part na yan, class, hindi na nagbabago-bago yung gamot. So, dito tayo. Oops. So, dito tayo. Okay, yan yung tinitingnan natin concentrations. Okay, we look at the concentrations there. Because again, at steady state, class, the amount of drug being absorbed is equal to the amount of drug being eliminated. And it's stable. Okay, the plasma concentration is stable there. Hindi na siya nag-fluctuate. Okay. So another thing, class, that we can look at here are the pharmacokinetic parameters that we have. Okay, so say for example, as AUC. AUC is simply defined as the amount of drug in the bloodstream at a given time. So after 1 dose, how much of the drug was absorbed? Okay, so makikita natin yan sa AUC. That's why, class, AUC is a very important pharmacokinetic parameter when determining bioavailability. Right? So sabi yan, extent of drug absorption. So the amount of drug, the more drug absorbed, equates to more effects. Okay, so it's based on the principle of kinetic homogeneity theory. Now, Cmax naman, class, on the other hand, measures the intensity of the effect. So the higher the Cmax, okay, we expect, okay, based on the kinetic homogeneity theory, that the drug will also have high response, high effects. Okay, so the higher the Cmax, the higher the effect will be. Okay, and then Tmax naman, class, on the other hand, measures the rate of absorption. So the higher the Tmax, okay, the lesser or the slower the drug is being absorbed. Okay, like say for example, guys, let me give you an example. Okay, let's have here a plasma level time curve. Here is drug A. Okay, drug A. Ito yung kanyang Cmax. Now, wherever the Cmax is, class, okay, look at the x-axis, yun yung kanyang Tmax. Tmax kasi, class, measures what time it took for the drug to reach the Cmax, or the highest amount of drug absorbed. Here's drug A. Excuse me. Now, let's say, class, here's drug B. Okay, here's drug B. At ito naman yung kanyang Tmax. Sabihin natin, class, ang Tmax ni drug B is 2 hours, while the Tmax of drug A is 5 hours. So which of these two drugs was absorbed faster? Okay, so looking at the graph, class, obviously it's drug B. Why? Because after 2 hours, class, okay, na-absorb na halos lahat ng gamot. Okay, the total amount of drug absorbed was already there. Okay, sorry, not all of the drug pala, sorry. The highest amount of drug to be absorbed is already there after 2 hours. Eh si drug A, it took drug A 5 hours to reach the highest amount of drug that it can absorb. Okay, so between drug A and drug B was absorbed faster. That's why class Tmax is said to measure the rate of absorption. Okay, now between the two naman, class, which drug do you think has a higher bioavailability overall? Okay, most likely that would be drug A. Kasi looking at drug A, class, bakit mas mataas ang bioavailability niya? Kasi mas malawak yung kanyang area under the curve. Okay, meaning in terms of extent of absorption, class, in terms of the amount of drug absorbed, drug A most likely had more absorption as compared to drug B. Kasi drug B, mabilis ka na-absorb, mabilis ding nawala. Diba, ganyan naman talaga minsan ng buhay. Minsan, yung mga bagay na mabilis natin nakukuha, eh mabilis ding nawawala. Pero yung mga pinaghirapan natin, it took time, okay, yun yung matagal ding mawala sa atin. Okay, etos lang. Hindi na related yun sa ating lesson. Alright, so I hope that makes sense. Now, what are the different pharmacokinetic parameters used to assess bioavailability? So we have the Tmax, Cmax, and AUC. Oftentimes, guys, when we do BABE studies, bioavailability, bioequivalent studies, itong tatlong parameters lang madalas na hinihingi. Okay, or de-determine ng mga researchers. So, Tmax kasi measures the rate. Okay, Cmax measures both rate and extent. Kasi wherever the Cmax is, that's where the Tmax will be. And then, of course, AUC is very dependent also in the presence of Cmax. Okay, and just so you know nga pala, class, at Cmax, I think I mentioned this before. Okay, pero paulit-ulitin ko lang, Cmax is where absorption is equal to elimination. So the amount of drug being absorbed is equal to the amount of drug being eliminated. Okay, and oftentimes, class, Cmax can be related to your CSS, or steady state plasma concentration, where the amount of drug absorbed is also equal to the amount of drug excreted. Okay? Okay. Now, what are the various mechanisms of drug absorption? Okay, how are drugs being absorbed? So we're talking about absorption here naman eh. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mechanisms, class, where a drug can be absorbed. First one is passive diffusion. So this is a mechanism, class, wherein a drug simply goes with the concentration gradient. So meaning it moves from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. And this is the type of mechanism of absorption that drugs use when they are lipid soluble. Okay? So lipid soluble, so meaning it just simply enters the cell, okay, to create a response. Kasi nga, since it's lipid soluble, it can easily pass through the cell membrane. And it simply just goes with the concentration gradient. Convective transport, on the other hand, class, is the mechanism where water-soluble solutes move across tight junctions in the pores. Okay, kasi class, if you look at the cell membrane, diba sabi natin, there are hydrophilic heads, then hydrophobic tails. Okay, that's the lipid bilayer membrane, cell membrane. Okay, so looking at this, class, looking at this mechanism, if this is the drug, okay, and it's highly water soluble. So alam naman natin, class, if a drug is highly water-soluble, mahihirapan siyang matunaw sa lipid cell membrane. It cannot cross the cell membrane. So what the drug will do, okay, so huwag kayong mag-alala, may pag-asa pa yung drug na to. Okay, what the drug will do, class, is simply cross in between the tight junctions here. Okay, between the hydrophilic heads and then the hydrophobic tails. Diyan siya dadaan, class, so that it can enter the cell and elicit its response. Okay? Unlike kasi, class, for water-soluble drugs or lipid-soluble drugs, if it's lipid-soluble, okay, this green drug here, say for example, it's just going to penetrate here. Okay? Diretso lang siya kasi nga lipid-soluble naman siya. Pero for water-soluble drugs, class, it needs to cross the tight junctions pa. Okay? And so on and so forth. And another thing, class, that you have to take note here is that whenever a drug utilizes excuse me, utilizes convective transport, it's very dependent on osmotic pressure. Okay, it's very dependent on osmotic pressure. Osmotic pressure, class, is simply the movement of water in and out of a cell. Okay, so alam naman natin, class, that for osmosis to take place, if this is a water, ibigay natin kulay. Okay, so if it's water, class, that we're dealing here, okay, di ba, class, ang driving force niyan is the amount of solutes. So, if there are more solutes here inside the cell, okay, then water, class, is going to drive in. Okay, the force, the direction of the water will go in. If more solute is outside the cell membrane, then the movement of water, class, will be palabas. Okay, so palabas. So now, class, so for the water-soluble molecule, class, to go in the cell, it needs a driving force. And that driving force, class, is called the osmotic pressure. So, kumbaga, makikiride lang yung water-soluble drug sa tubig para ma-push siya papasok ng cell. Kasi mahirap, class, sumiksik yung water-soluble drug natin. Hirap yan sumiksik between the tight pores or the tight junctions. Okay? So, yun. Kailangan niya ng presence ng osmotic pressure here. Right? I shouldn't actually be discussing this. Why am I discussing this? This has been discussed multiple times in Pharm 5. Okay? Pero anyway, it's nice to know. And I love sharing naman. Okay? So, saglit lang. Burahin natin ulit yung mga pinagsusulat natin dito. So, we can proceed with our with the other mechanisms of drug absorption. Okay. So next would be active transport. So as mentioned, class, active transport, if you can remember, this is the transport mechanism which goes against the concentration gradient. So kung concentration gradient is movement of solute from high to low, high solute concentration to low solute concentration, okay, active transport opposes that. So it moves from area of low solute concentration to an area of high concentration. So parang ano lang yan, class, parang pag ikaw yung minority sa isang grupo, or ito lang, LRT na lang, di ba? LRT. So, pag yung LRT train, class, papunta sa station nyo, tapos punong-puno ng tao, gusto mong pumasok sa train. Okay? Di ba makikipag bunong braso ka dyan. Okay? Kasi gusto mong pumasok pero lahat ng tao palabas. Okay? So, you'll be spending a lot of energy just so you can get in the train. So, that's the reason why, class, if you try to go against the flow, okay, go against the concentration gradient, you need ATP. Okay, you will need energy. Okay, because you're going against the concentration gradient. Di ba, kung ikaw ay may ibang opinion kumpara sa mga kaklase mo, minsan tatahimik ka na lang, right? Pero kung gusto mo talaga ipaglaban yung opinion mo, you're going to spend a lot of energy just to convince your classmates that this is what's right. This is what you want. Okay? So that's concentration. That's active transport. What about, class, facilitated transport? Facilitated transport, on the other hand, similar to diffusion, okay, where it also goes with the concentration gradient. Now, the difference lang kasi, class, between facilitated transport and diffusion is that there's the presence of carriers. Same goes, class, with active transport mechanism. Okay? Both active and facilitated transport mechanism requires the presence of a carrier. Now, because it has a carrier, because this mechanism utilizes a carrier class, okay, the carrier can be saturated. How do we define saturation ba? Saturated, ibig sabihin napupuno. Okay? Kasi class, if this is the carrier, ito halimbawa, yung carrier natin, okay, it has a limited capacity. It can only accommodate so many solutes lang. Okay, let's say, for example, class, excuse me, it can only accommodate 1, 2, 3, 4 solute molecules. So therefore, class, napupuno yung carrier na to. Right? Since it can saturate, di ba sabi natin, saturation is the point at which a solution or a system cannot accommodate additional solutes. Alright? So same here. Okay? So nasa-saturate siya. So since it saturates, class, excuse me, since it saturates, okay, one of the pharmacokinetic equations that we can apply here to describe the entire system is what we call the Michaelis-Menten equation. Okay, the Michaelis-Menten equation. It's an equation class that describes saturation kinetics. Describes system that undergoes saturation. And normally, class, if a system can saturate, it follows zero order process. Right? So alam niyo na to, zero order process, right? Okay, what enzymes use, so what carriers, yung carrier mediated transport mechanism, ginagamit nilang equation or explanation on how they occur. Okay? So yeah, we'll talk more about this class when we reach basic pharmacokinetics, pero I'm sure alam niyo na to. Zero order, first order, sawang-sawa na kayong marinig ito. Pero we'll have a review topic about this. Okay, it's very important kasi especially when we're starting our computation. Okay? Okay. Next one, class, is ion pair transport mechanism. So it's a complex between organic and ion with a cation of the membrane. Okay, hindi natin explain ito. Madalang lang naman ang gumagamit ng ion pair transport. And the last class will be the vesicular transport mechanism. So as we've mentioned a while ago, one of the exceptions to the rule where a drug must exist in its aqueous form, okay, are those drugs that are absorbed via vesicular transport, or what we call endocytosis. Okay, so pinocytosis, phagocytosis, such as vitamins A, D, E, K. Okay, so phagocytosis is cell eating, while pinocytosis is cell drinking. Okay, something I'm pretty sure you guys know na. Right? Okay. So these are all the mechanisms used to absorb drugs into the cell, okay, for it to take effect. Now, what are the output processes naman? For output processes class, we have the following: distribution, metabolism, excretion. Now, so sa ADME, so DME class is part of the disposition process, or what we call the output processes. Okay, kasi class, by definition, disposition is simply defined as the loss of drug from the central compartment. So meaning, once a drug leaves the bloodstream, central compartment nga pala here refers to your systemic circulation. Okay? So we use this synonymously. So when we say class central compartment, okay, we're simply talking about the systemic circulation or any organs or tissues having similar blood flow. Yun na lang. Okay? So once a drug leaves the systemic circulation, it's already in a process known as disposition, or it's already in the drug output process. Kasi input, papasok sa dugo. Output, palabas ng dugo. Pwede kasi nag-distribute siya going to its target sites. Okay? That's still part of disposition process. Or it goes to your liver or kidneys to undergo metabolism and excretion. Okay? Due to transfer into other compartments and or elimination and metabolism. Okay? So basically, class, disposition process or drug output process includes includes distribution, metabolism, excretion. Let's talk about distribution class. So sabi natin, it's the process where a drug molecule leaves the bloodstream. Right? So, pwede kasi class, ang drug natin aalis ng bloodstream papunta sa muscles. okay, such as muscle relaxants or any drug that targets muscles, okay, or goes to your pancreas, such as in the case of OHA or oral hypoglycemic agents, or goes to your adipose tissues for deposition. What are the factors then affecting drug distribution? So in terms of distribution class, there are 4 factors affecting this. So membrane permeability, blood flow, plasma protein binding, and depot storage. Okay, in terms of membrane permeability kasi class, the more permeable a drug is to the cell, okay, the greater will be its distribution. Why? Because it allows the drug to leave the bloodstream. Okay? So in membrane permeability class, dito pumapasok yung lipophilicity ng isang gamot. Lipophilic characteristic niya. So, increase ang lipophilicity ng gamot, increase ang permeability. Therefore, it increases distribution. Because again, ang goal natin sa distribution class ay umalis ang gamot sa bloodstream para pumunta sa target sites niya or pwedeng pumunta sa adipose tissues, blah, blah, blah. So on and so forth. Okay? That's distribution. Blood flow is very important. Why? If the blood is not flowing, how will the drug distribute? Make sense? That's why, class, one of the most important factor affecting distribution is blood flow. Blood flow is actually the rate-limiting step in the distribution process. The faster the blood flow is, faster the drug will distribute. That's why, class, whenever we are in an emergency situation, our body pumps blood fast, okay? Na-activate yung sympathetic nervous system natin so that nutrients and other necessary compounds inside our body is distributed throughout the body. Okay, next one, class, is plasma protein binding. Okay, the more a drug is plasma protein bound, take note of the term, plasma protein. Meaning these are the proteins in your blood. So, kumbaga, class, yung mga plasma protein na to, pinipigilan nila yung mga gamot na lumabas ng dugo. Okay, they want the drug to stay in the blood. And if the drug stays in the blood, okay, then the drug cannot distribute. That's why it's another major factor that affects drug distribution. Okay, and then depot storage. So, lipophilicity class increases the permeability and thus increases distribution as well. Okay, blood flow, as I've said, is the rate-limiting step. The faster the blood is flowing, the more it distributes. Okay, and then depot storage naman, class, is dependent on blood flow and affinity. So, if a drug accumulates in a specific target site, then it doesn't distribute. Okay, so therefore, increase in accumulation, class, leads to a decrease in distribution. So what are other factors affecting distribution? So in terms of rate and extent. Remember, class, when we talk about rate, we're talking about how fast. We're talking about speed here. Okay, well, when we're talking about extent, okay, usually we talk about how much. Okay, up to where. Okay, gaano karami ang nadi-distribute? Hanggang saan ang naaabot ng distribution natin? So that's extent. Okay, so factors that affects the rate includes membrane permeability, capillary wall structure, drugs pKa and pH, obviously, and then blood perfusion. Okay, or blood flow. Right? Now, in terms of extent, okay, solubility, lipid solubility, again, papasok ulit ang pH pKa. Plasma protein binding is an important factor here, and then tissue localization. Now, let's discuss, class, about volume of distribution. Volume distribution kasi, class, is the kinetic parameter that assesses distribution. Okay? So basically, class, we assume here, or ang formula na ginagamit natin here simply is the total amount of drug in the body, which refers to your dose administered, divided by the drug blood concentration, or, oops, hindi pala kita dyan. Erase, wait lang. Okay, let's remove this here. Okay, so, class, total amount of drug in the body, we're referring here to the dose. How much of the drug was given. And then this drug blood concentration, we're referring to your plasma concentration. How much of the drug reached the bloodstream. Now, oftentimes, class, if the drug is given intravenously, then whatever the dose is, that's also the amount of drug in the blood. Okay? So, ang next question dyan is, what's the concentration of the drug in the blood? Okay? Kasi dose, 500 milligrams. Ano yung concentration? You have to consider the volume of blood in the body. Right? So, that's that. So, what's the relationship here, class? Okay? Normally, if you look at the formula for VD, so it's VD equals dose over plasma concentration, plasma drug concentration. So you can see here, class, the relationship between volume distribution and the dose. So an increase in VD would mean there is high dose, correct? Okay, meaning the drug, the more you give the drug, the higher the dose you give, the more likelihood the drug will distribute. Okay? Now what about in terms of plasma concentration? So it's inversely proportional. The lesser the amount of drug is in the blood, okay, the lesser concentration of drug in the blood, the higher is the distribution. Paano nangyari yun? Okay, simply put, class, simply put, pag kumukonti yung drug sa bloodstream natin, anong ibig sabihin nito? Pag kumukonti yung drug in the plasma concentration or in the blood, it simply means, class, that the drug is leaving the bloodstream. So once the drug leaves the bloodstream, yung plasma concentration obviously bababa. At kapag lumabas ang drug sa bloodstream, ibig sabihin nito, nagdi-distribute siya. That's why, class, the relationship of volume distribution to plasma concentration is inversely proportional. So the lesser amount of drug is in the blood, it only means that the more drugs are distributing. So I hope that makes sense. All right. So, class, just so you know, volume distribution is the required volume of fluid to contain the total amount of drug in the body at the same concentration as that in your blood. Okay, so minimum VD must be at least equal to your plasma volume. So volume distribution, class, simply measures the extent of distribution. So the higher the VD, it only indicates that distribution is also higher. Now let's talk about protein binding. So protein binding, class, simply is a phenomenon that happens inside the body which prevents drugs from leaving the bloodstream. Okay, because these plasma protein, class, are usually confined in the bloodstream and they are large molecules. Okay, so imagine this one, class. Here's the ito yan. Ito yung bloodstream natin, kunwari. Representation lang. So, class, if the green molecule here is the drug, okay, then the blue molecule here are the proteins. These are proteins. Okay, yung protein sila. So now, class, proteins are macromolecules, meaning these are large structures. Protein, class, cannot leave the bloodstream because sobrang laki nila. A free drug, a drug in its unbound state, can easily leave the bloodstream, so it's unbound. So since it's unbound, it can leave the bloodstream, it can distribute. Okay? Now, what if that drug is bound to a protein? Okay? Kinulong siya ng protein, kumbaga. So once a drug class is already protein bound, it cannot leave the bloodstream. Why? Okay? Simply because, class, it's attached to a large molecule. Okay? That cannot leave the bloodstream as well. So kumbaga dinamay ni protein yung drug natin. Okay, dinamay. So hindi siya makaka-leave sa bloodstream. So therefore, class, it cannot distribute. And if a drug cannot distribute, it cannot go to its target sites. It cannot go to the liver. It cannot go to the kidney for elimination. Okay, it cannot be disposed. So it stays in the bloodstream. It cannot take effect because it cannot go to its target sites. Make sense? That's why, class, bound drugs, drugs that are protein bound, do not have pharmacological effects and they cannot be cleared from the body. Now, the good thing here is drugs that are bound, okay, are not permanently bound. They are bound simply by weak forces like hydrogen bond or weak forces lang yan. It's reversible. Okay, it's reversible. So sooner or later, class, the bound drugs will be released and therefore it's going to create an effect and it will be cleared out of the body. Okay, that's the reason why, class, for phenytoin is a drug that is 90% protein bound. Whenever we give dosing here, class, for phenytoin, usually we give high loading dose pero minimal maintenance dose. Why? High loading dose kasi alam kong 90% of this drug will be bound, So I need to have an excess, a little bit of excess, so that it can exist in its unbound state and be able to produce an effect. Now, mababa ang maintenance dose ng phenytoin simply because, okay, we know that some of the drugs have been protein bound and it will be released after a given period of time. Eh kung mataas din ang maintenance dose ko, dinalason yung patient ko when the protein bound phenytoin is released. Okay, so just enough lang, okay, so mababa lang, enough to be within the MEC, above the MEC, then class, yung excess phenytoin that will be released by the proteins, by the plasma proteins, will be enough to keep the concentration within the therapeutic window. Okay, so napag-aaralan yung mga ganung bagay. Ang galing ka eh. Okay, it's amazing how we were able to discover these things. Right? So, if a drug has high VD, meaning the drug is less protein bound. So what are the proteins that binds our drugs? So we have two common proteins that binds drug. We have albumin and alpha-1 acid glycoprotein. So albumin class being a basic drug, okay, binds, tawag dito, they bind, it's basic, it binds weakly acidic drugs. Okay, while for alpha-1 acid glycoprotein, obviously it's acid, so they bind to basic drugs. Yeah. So they usually use weak forces like van der Waals forces, and it's reversible. Okay, so an increase in protein binding class would lead to a decrease in efficacy because it cannot go to its target site. Okay, and therefore leads to less urinary excretion because it cannot be distributed to the kidneys. Kasi na-confine siya sa blood eh. Okay, so therefore class, it leads to an increase in the half-life of the drug. Meaning, napoprolong yung stay ng gamot sa katawan natin. So again, yun lang naman yun. Bowels too big for elimination. Therefore, drugs cannot be eliminated. Okay, so we're done class with distribution. Next part of the ADME would be metabolism. Okay, so the task of drug elimination. So we have class the mnemonics chore. Okay, so that's conjugation, hydrolysis, oxidation, reduction, excretion. Okay, so conjugation class is part of the phase 2 metabolism. Okay, wherein we add conjugates to our drugs to make them water soluble. Before anything else. Okay, the primary job of metabolism class is to make compounds or chemicals water soluble. Purely water soluble. Just don't get me wrong ha. They make them purely water soluble. Okay? Na kasi baka sabihin niyo, ay sir, ginawa niyang water soluble, so ibig sabihin mas matutunaw siya sa blood. Yes. Yes. And therefore sir, it will be absorbed. Not necessarily. Okay? Kasi by making a drug class into its pure water soluble state, into its pure polar state, you allow the drug to go with water for elimination. Okay, so that it can go directly into the kidneys and be eliminated as part of the urine. Okay, kasi class, kung titingnan ninyo, ang urine natin, saan ba gawa? Mantika or tubig? Diba? It's 100% water. Okay, so therefore, by making the drug into its pure water-soluble state, okay, by deactivating it and making it into its pure water-soluble state, mas mabilis siyang na-eliminate sa katawan natin. Okay? While for phase 1 reactions, we have here hydrolysis, oxidation, reduction. So this is either the unmasking of the hydroxyl groups, making the water molecule more polar. Okay? And then ready for excretion. So conjugation class simply adds polar conjugates. It's the most common pathway utilized by neonates. While for hydrolysis class or phase 1 reactions, it's called functionalization phase. So it's either addition or unmasking of functional groups, making them more water soluble. Okay, so hydrolysis is the metabolic pathway used by esters and amides. While oxidation class is the most common type of metabolic pathway na ginagamit ng mga drugs natin because oxidation is what cytochrome P450, the major enzyme responsible for drug metabolism, uses. So they oxidize our medications. Okay, so yeah, example of which would be monoamine oxidase, alcohol aldehyde dehydrogenase. Examples of enzymes that uses oxidation reaction. Then for reduction class, we have the nitro reduction and the carbonyl reduction. Nitro reduction is what chloramphenicol uses. And if it's once it's metabolized class, ang problem kasi with chloramphenicol is that it leads to methemoglobinemia. Can lead to methemoglobinemia. Methemoglobinemia, especially for babies. Okay, kaya nga nagkakaroon tayo ng gray baby syndrome. And then for carbonyl reduction, that's yun yung metabolic pathway na ginagamit ng naloxone, giving it a very short half-life. Okay? So, biotransformation class is simply the process where drugs are converted into their water-soluble, inactive metabolite. Okay? Here's the keyword here. Kasi, yes, they are made more water-soluble, but they are also made inactive. Okay? So, by making them more water-soluble class, it allows the drug to be excreted easily. Yeah. Another term for biotransformation class is detoxification. Okay, now of course class, biotransformation makes drugs into their inactive form, inactive metabolite, okay, generally, pero with the exception of prodrugs. Kasi prodrugs class, once metabolized, they produce active metabolites. Alright? Kaya it becomes a little complicated. Okay? The presence of the presence kasi of active metabolites can complicate therapeutic drug monitoring. Okay, kasi usually ina-assess ko lang dyan yung active drug eh. Biglang may active, active metabolite. So, ang hirap i-assess pag may ganong klaseng scenario. Right? So, metabolism. Okay, let's assume here, class, that 2 parts of a drug is liberated. So, tinamad na akong gumawa ng animation here. Okay, now normally, class, metabolism, or more commonly known as first-pass effect for most drugs, okay, is called a pre-systemic degradation. Pre-systemic, ibig sabihin before it even reaches the bloodstream. So, okay, before the liberated drug even reaches the bloodstream, liver starts to produce an enzyme known as the cytochrome P450. Okay, so the cytochrome P450 class, actually, to be more precise, it's CYP3A4. Don't forget the cytochrome P450 enzyme. CYP3A4 kasi class is the tawag dito. It's the enzyme that's call this. It's the major enzyme class designed to degrade most drugs. Okay. So it starts to degrade the drug. Right? And therefore the drug class will just simply go with the feces and be excreted. Okay, before it even enters the bloodstream. So therefore, class, only one part of the drug remains for absorption and drug effect. Okay, so just so you know, class, first pass effect, once again, is a pre-systemic metabolism. So meaning before the drug even enters the bloodstream, it's already degraded. So here are example, class, of drugs that are enzyme inducers. Okay, meaning they promote the production of more enzymes. Now, class, between enzyme inducers and enzyme inhibitors nga pala, enzyme inducers work slowly. It takes days, months, probably even years, because the drug must alter the genes, okay, to produce more enzymes. Okay, so there's gene alteration that's happening here. Okay, kaya nga between enzyme inducers and enzyme inhibitors, okay, mas delikado ang enzyme inhibitors. Because enzyme inhibitors work immediately and they cause an increase in the concentration of the drug, therefore causing toxicity. Enzyme inducers, on the other hand, class, simply reduces the effect of the drug, making it, well, less effective. So therefore, hindi ka lang nalason, pero technically, wala naman nangyari sa'yo. Okay? So which is better? Walang mangyari sa'yo, may nangyari sa'yo. Right? So, examples of enzyme inducers class, you have the pneumonics Boston Red Sox got to play quality competition. So, that's barbiturates, rifampin, glyceofulvin, phenytoin, quinidine, carbamazepine. One thing you'll notice, class, most of these are anticonvulsants. Okay, with the exception, of course, of rifampin, glyceofulvin, and quinidine, which are antimicrobials. So, rifampin is antibiotic, glyceofulvin is antifungal, quinidine is antimalarial. Right? Another mnemonics that we can use, PRC. Ito yung mas common na tinuturo sa mga review centers. Okay, so PRC, phenobarbital, phenytoin, rifampicin, carbamazepine, cigarette, charcoal, broiled foods. Okay, it's just addition lang. What about for enzyme inhibitors? Again, class, enzyme inhibitors works fast. Within minutes to hours. Okay? Enzyme inducers kasi takes days, months, or years before they start to work. Kasi there's gene alteration that's happening here. Again, application of pharmacogenomics. Okay? For enzyme inhibitors, on the other hand, they just simply inhibit the enzyme. Okay, that's why they work fast. And they lead, and enzyme inhibitors lead to toxicities, causing an increase in drug concentration kasi na-inhibit yung enzyme. So, IC-kegs, examples of which are isoniazid, cimetidine, chloramphenicol, ketoconazole, erythromycin, grapefruit, and sulfonamides. One thing you'll notice, class, most of these drugs are antimicrobials. With the exception ng siguro, class, of cimetidine and grapefruit juice. Now, here's the thing nga pala regarding grapefruit juice. Kaya ang dami lagi sinasabing, huwag kang gagamit ng grapefruit juice kasama ang mga medications mo. Okay? Kasi class, okay, nagkakaroon tayo ng misconception with how we use grapefruit juice. Masarap to eh, parang pomelo lang to eh. Parang pomelo juice ito. It really tastes good. Okay, pero class, the question here would usually be, how much grapefruit juice do you need to ingest before it causes enzyme inhibition? Okay, kasi class, in studies, it takes liters of grapefruit juice. If you're just taking 1 glass of grapefruit juice, class, it's not going to have a significant effect on your medications. Okay, if you're taking grapefruit juice, class, at the liters, litro ang iniinom mo per day, every day to then that would be a problem. Okay, if you only take it for 1 glass, class, there won't be any problem. Alright? Okay. So yun, isoniazid, obviously, it's antitubercular, chloramphenicol. Cimetidine is a H2 blocker. Okay, used for upset stomachs. Erythromycin is an antibiotic. Sulfonamides are also antibiotics. Another mnemonics class that we have for enzyme inhibitors, we have Medvic. Nagdaglagan si metronidazole, disulfiram, which is aldehyde dehydrogenase inhibitor. So ginagamit for alcohol dehydrogenase inhibitor pala, sorry. Yung disulfiram. It's used for alcohol withdrawal. Okay, so of course, class, another exception here would be valproic acid. Remember valproic acid, class? It's an anticonvulsant. So there will always be a exception to the rule. Kasi kanina, yung mga enzyme inducers natin are mostly anticonvulsants. So with the exception of valproic acid. Okay? Ayun. Now, what about for excretion, class? So, the main organ for metabolism, as you all know, is liver. Okay, so for excretion, that would be the kidneys. Okay, so excretion refers to the elimination of drug substances in its unchanged form. Okay, so normally when the drug is unchanged, it can be excreted. Okay, directly. Pero if it's changed, class, it's metabolized, then it undergoes what we call elimination. Kasi it was changed prior to excretion. Okay, so excretion normally happens for drugs in their unchanged form. And the functional unit of our kidneys, class, would be nephrons. Okay, so the process of filtration that happens, class, in the kidney is known as the glomerular filtration. So it usually filters low molecular weight molecules. So measured using a drug substance that's eliminated only via filtration. So if you want to, glomerular filtration, class, we can measure this. And it refers to the function of the kidneys. So therefore, class, an increase in GFR, glomerular filtration rate, means that the kidney is functioning well. Okay, good functioning kidneys. Pag mababa, class, ang GFR mo, meaning there is damage to the kidneys. Okay, and what do we use, class, to assess glomerular filtration? Normally we have, the most common would be creatinine clearance. Okay, so dati, class, gumagamit tayo ng inulin as a substance used to assess glomerular filtration. Now the problem lang, class, is it's very expensive. Okay, so we found out then that what do you call this, creatinine, which is a byproduct of protein metabolism inside the body itself, is purely eliminated via GFR. So hence, whenever we assess, class, glomerular filtration rate, we only use creatinine na lang nowadays. Kasi it's a natural byproduct in the body. So no need to add additional substances in the body just to check for GFR. Now, class, let's talk about the various models and compartments. Okay, so we have two compartment models here. Okay, so one compartment versus two compartment model. So before we go here, class, let's first discuss what's the difference between a model and a compartment. Model, class, is a mathematical description of a biologic system. Okay, so it is used to express quantitative relationships concisely. Okay, while on the other hand, compartments are described or are defined as a group of tissues with similar blood flow and drug affinity. So it's not a specific organ or not a specific area inside the body. Okay, kasi class, when we say compartments, we are grouping organ systems with similar blood flow. Say, for example, heart, kidneys, lungs, brain, they all have similar blood flow. They are highly perfused organs. So it's not a real physiologic or anatomic region. Okay, that's a compartment. So compartments, simply put, are categories of organs with similar blood flow. Okay, so pwedeng central compartment or peripheral compartment. Okay, while models, class, is a mathematical description of this biologic system. Compartments are termed to be deterministic because the observed drug concentration determines the type of compartment model used. So we have two types, one compartment versus two compartment models. So organs are grouped based on the similarities on drug distribution to simplify body structures. So another way to simplify the body is through the expression of the changes in the amount of drug in the body over time. So the rates. When we're talking about rates here, class, we're talking about the absorption rate, the distribution rate, and then of course the most important is elimination rate. So this is absorption, distribution, and then the elimination rates. Okay? So it can be described using a compartment model. Now, what are the various types of compartments? Okay, we have the central compartment and then the peripheral compartment. Under central compartment, class, are heart, liver, lungs, blood, kidneys. Peripheral compartment includes fat, muscles, and cerebrospinal fluid. So one thing you'll notice here, class, all of the organ systems in the central compartment are highly perfused organs. Highly perfused. Ibig sabihin, mataas yung blood flow. There is high blood flow. While for fat, muscles, and cerebrospinal fluids, these are poorly perfused organs. Okay, they have low blood flow. Okay. So, for open one compartment model, class, open one compartment. So, ibig sabihin, in open one compartment model, class, isang compartment lang pinag-uusapan natin dito. And it's open, so meaning the flow, the in and outs of the drug is instantaneous. Okay? The in and out movement. So, walang barriers, kumbaga. Kaya open siya. Then, one compartment model, ibig sabihin, isang compartment lang ang pinag-uusapan dito. So, if the drug entering the body distributes instantly between the blood and other body fluids or tissues. So, in one compartment model, class, drug is not necessarily confined to the circulatory system. Okay? So, ang assumption kasi, class, in one compartment model is that the human body, okay, this the human body, okay, is equal to just a container of fluid. It's just equivalent to a glass of water, wherein the total amount of blood inside the body is equal to the volume at which a container can contain. Okay? So, yun lang siya. But of course, in reality, class, the body is not a glass of water. There are many membranes and barriers within the body. Okay, so, of course, it's not true. Pero this is the best assumption we can use to simplify our formulas, our equations. Okay, so hence, class, in one compartment model actually is the most widely used compartment model to describe the pharmacokinetics of drugs in the body. Okay? So, ang tingin lang natin sa katawan is just a glass of water. So, drugs may occupy the entire extracellular fluid, soft tissues, and the entire body. And distribution here occurs instantly. Kasi walang barriers na nangyayari. Walang hindrances sa loob ng katawan. Because again, we're just looking at the body as a glass of water. So it's not pooled in a specific area. So what are the characteristics of an open one compartment model? Via intravascular route. Intravascular. So meaning, no absorption. So walang absorption phase to. 100% bioavailability. So no absorption, rapid distribution of drug between bloodstream and tissues. Equilibrium is instantly obtained. And the fall of drug concentration depends on excretion and metabolism. This is how an IV model, IV bolus model, one compartment IV bolus model looks like. Again, class, walang barriers sa loob ng katawan. So meaning is just the involvement, there's only the involvement of the central compartment. Kaya one compartment model. At zero time, it's already at its highest concentration, and the drug eliminates following first order kinetics. So here, class, ang representation lang is a dose of drug enters the body, okay, enters the body, and is eliminated without any hitch, okay. So class, here, ang involved lang is the central compartment, meaning the organs with similar blood flow, high perfusion. Okay, kaya siya kasi tinawag na one compartment because we're only talking about one compartment here. Oops, the central compartment only. Okay, does that make sense? And the distribution class happens instantaneously, meaning the moment you administer a drug intravenously, dito lang, pwede nandito. The moment you administer drug instantaneously, the moment you push the plunger class, it distributes, the drug will distribute from head to toe. Immediately, instantaneously. Of course, that's not the reality of things. Okay, di naman instantaneous talaga ang distribution ng gamot sa katawan natin eh. Pero that's the assumption in one compartment model. And that assumption is done simply simply just simplify the equations that we're using. Okay? So, the drug elimination is a first order process, and the first order elimination rate constant. Okay, so the apparent volume distribution is simply computed as the dose given by IV bolus versus the plasma concentration at zero time. Now, one thing you have to remember, class, it's impossible to get the plasma concentration at zero time. Normally, we get the concentration after 1 hour, 30 minutes, pwede yun. Okay? Pero, class, dito na yun. So, after 1 hour. So, magpa-plot tayo. Ang line natin, class, gumukhang ganyan. How do we therefore get the concentration at zero time? So, since this is a line, class, we can just simply extrapolate or assume the concentration at zero time. So, we do back extrapolation. Okay, we call this feathering. Or we call this back extrapolation to determine Cp sub 0 or the concentration at zero time. Because again, it's impossible to get the plasma concentration at zero time. The real plasma concentration at zero time. So with class, what we do is we assume the value. We do feathering. We do back extrapolation. If you know how to use Excel, class, madaling i-determine to. Excel will compute it for you. Okay? So, yun. So, simply, VD is just dose over plasma concentration at zero time for drugs given intravenously. So, volume distribution here indicates the extent of drug distribution into the body fluids and tissues. So, it relates to the amount of drug in the body to the measured concentration in the plasma. So, we already know this. So, a high VD class indicates that the drug is distributing extensively, meaning it can distribute outside the plasma, while a low VD would indicate that the drug is not distributing well, and it might be confined in the circulatory system. So, if VD class is approximately 5 liters, so we can assume that the drug is distributing in these parts of the body. So, I won't explain this anymore. Now, please take note, class, that volume distribution indicates the extent of distribution, but not the exact tissues or fluid where the drug is distributing. So, hindi niya sasabihin, ay, nasa mata mo na yung drug. Ay, nasa bibig mo na yung drug. Nasa utak mo na yung drug. Okay, no. VD cannot determine that. VD can only determine the extent of distribution. Is it highly distributed or poorly distributed? Yun lang ang kayang i-determine ni VD. Okay, so example, two drugs may have the same VD, but one drug distributes in the muscles, while the other one can distribute to the adipose tissues. Okay, so in computing for VD, imagine the body to be a tank of water. Okay, so halimbawa, ganito lang naman yung klase. If this is the tank of water, so this is your body, it contains a specified amount of water, amount of fluid. So this fluid class is the VD. Okay, that's the VD. Now, if you give a certain amount of drug, a dose of a drug, okay, pag tinunokin, say for example, 500 milligrams ito, yung volume ng fluid na to class is, let's say, 5 liters. Knowing these values class, I can actually compute for my plasma concentration, right? That's just simply 500 milligrams divided by 5 liters. And you get, okay, let's get my handy-dandy calculator. Alam ko naman ang answer dito, pero kinakalculate ko pa rin. That would be 100 milligram per liter. And that's the concentration. Di ba ang dali? Okay, kasi class, ang assumption lang natin is that the human body is just a glass of water. Alright? So remember, class, the amount of fluids that can be accommodated in a glass of water is the VD. And whatever your dose is, just divide by the VD, you can compute for plasma concentration at 0 time, before I forget. Okay, that's CP sub 0. So are we good? Okay, so yan yung assumption natin here in open one compartment model. Kasi walang hindrances. Right? Walang barriers. Here's a sample problem class. A new aminoglycoside antibiotic 5 mg per kilogram was injected intravenously, so meaning 100% bioavailability, to a 70 kilogram volunteer. Determine the VD if the plasma concentration at 0 time is 7 micrograms per ml. Okay. Okay, so one thing you have to remember nga pala class about volume distribution is that it is always expressed in liters. Okay, so VD will always be expressed in liters, not ml, not micro ml, not microliters. Okay, so it's always expressed in liters, right? And of course, in any computation class, alam niyo naman dapat cancelable ang mga units natin. Okay, so in my case class, so write ko muna yung given. We have the dose, which is equivalent to 5 milligram per kilogram. Patient's weight is 70 kilogram. Okay, ano pa bang mga binigay dito? VD, hindi binigay ang VD. CP sub 0 is 7 micrograms per ml. Now, normally class, when I do computations, lahat ng pwede kong i-convert na, kino-convert ko na dito. So, to get the dose, it's just simply 5 milligram per kilogram times 70 kilograms to get the exact dose. So, that's 5 times 70. We get 350 milligrams. Okay, then this one class, 7 microgram per ml. Okay, sige, i-convert muna natin, no? Para makita natin. So, sabi natin class, it's a microgram. So, usually, kailangan ko siya convert to milligrams. So, there's, for every 1 milligram, there is 1,000 micrograms. And then, for every ml, so denominator ang ml, there is 1,000 ml for every 1 liter. Because gusto ko siya convert to liters. Because, again, VD is expressed in liters. So, therefore, 7 times 1, 7 divided by 1,000 times 1,000 ulit. So, same amount lang. So, ang ratio, ang conversion factor ko here is 1:1. So, therefore, it becomes 7 milligrams per liter. Ay, mali, ba't ko binox? Alright? So, anyway, so yun siya. So, na-convert ko na yung mga units ko. So, ang aking required here, VD equals unknown. So, let's go to the solution. Ang formula that this VD equals dose over CP. Excuse me. So, therefore, our dose is 350 milligrams. Our CP is 7 milligrams per liter. So, cancel, cancel. 350 divided by 7, you get 50 liters. Right? So, same answer. Make sense? Actually, class, in pharmacokinetics, magugulat kayo, ito lang ang equation na pag-iikot-ikutan natin lagi. Okay? Any topic that we'll have here in pharmacokinetics, iikot lang talaga dyan. Okay? Now, what about class for one compartment pero extravascular naman? Okay? Given at an extravascular route. So, absorption proceeds according to drug liberation and absorption. So, ang difference lang class between intravascular and extravascular route of administration, open one compartment model, okay, is that ang intravascular route walang absorption phase, obviously. Okay, pero extravascular route has an absorption phase. Okay, and between their Cmax, obviously, mas mataas ang Cmax ng IV kesa sa extravascular. Extravascular could refer to your oral route of administration. So at zero time, no drug is in the systemic circulation because it has to undergo absorption process. As absorption proceeds, drug concentration in systemic circulation increases to a peak and then decreases according to elimination. It's not necessarily all of the administered drug is absorbed, so some can be eliminated immediately or excreted in its unchanged form. So this is how it happens, class. Again, the only difference, class, is meron tayong absorption phase. Okay? And then, after Cmax is achieved, okay, the drug will just decline following first order kinetics. Okay? Now, class, yung feathering na tinatawag natin kanina, di ba? Determining the CP sub 0. Usually, class, we do back extrapolation. Okay, kung ito yung oral, kasi kung ito yung oral dosage form, by doing back extrapolation, class, like this one, right? This is how the drug would look like if it was given intravenously. Okay? Ganito yung, kumbaga ginagawa lang natin yung back extrapolation yan just to see how would the line look like if it was, how would the drug look like if it was given intravascularly instead of per orally or extravascularly. Okay, importante kasi ito, class, because if you want to determine the absorption rate constant, you want to compare the rate at which the drug is entering sa something that's absolute, such as IV drug. Okay, so kino-compare lang siya sa IV. What would the graph look like if the drug was given intravenously? Now, let's talk about the open two compartment model. So, open one compartment model, isa lang yung compartment na pinag-uusapan natin, and that's the central compartment. Now, when we're talking about open two compartment models, obviously we are talking about two compartments here. And those two compartments here, class, includes the involvement of the central and the peripheral compartments. So in open two compartment model, class, the drug entering the body does not instantly distribute to the blood and those other body fluids or tissues which it eventually reaches. So distribution of the drug in blood and other soft tissues occurs at different rates. And then eventually, steady state will be reached, which terminates the distribution phase. So the only difference, class, between one compartment and two compartment model is that sa one compartment model, absorption, elimination phase lang. Kung IV yun, elimination phase lang meron. Pero sa open two compartment model, may nagkakaroon ng bagong rate here. The distribution rate. Okay? Kasi nagkakaroon ng variations in the distribution for two compartment model. So, for IV model, okay, for the IV open two compartment model, so no absorption takes place, obviously. There's a slow distribution of drug between bloodstream and tissues. Equilibrium is obtained some later time. Okay, and the steep fall of the first part of the blood level curve due to this distribution, and decline of the second part of blood level depends on back distribution of drug from tissue to blood, excretion, and metabolism. So, allow me to explain this. If this is our plasma level time curve, okay, let's have a plasma level time curve here. Obviously, it's IV route. So, at zero time, nasa peak ang concentration natin. Okay? Now, class, if this is a two-compartment model, initially, mababa yung amount of drug in the blood. Why is this so? Okay, let's have another figure here. Okay, here's the dose of the drug. Okay, now let's assume, class, that this drug is lipophilic. Okay, it's lipophilic. So, it goes into your central compartment. CP na lang, CC pala. Central compartment. Kasi, dyan naman lagi una pupunta ang gamot, di ba? Kaya saan ba una pupunta ang gamot? Pupunta siya sa blood. And blood is part of the central compartment. So initially, papasok siya sa blood. Okay? But because of its lipophilic characteristics, okay? Because of its lipophilic characteristic class, sumisegue yung gamot natin sa, pwede siyang sumegue sa adipose, which is the peripheral. Right? Wait, ganda lang natin to saglit. Sulutin natin ng blood. Blood, which is central. Okay? So, dahil class yung gamot natin, okay, pagkapunta niya sa blood, kadalasan, sesegue siya papunta sa adipose. Bakit siya sumegue papuntang adipose? Kasi ang affinity niya is towards the adipose tissues, right? Okay, so from the blood, bigla siyang bumaba papunta sa adipose tissues. Right? Kaya class, initially, mataas ang concentration, pero biglang bumagsak. Bakit bumagsak? Because drug transferred to the peripheral. To peripheral compartment. In this case, it's the adipose. So, biglang bagsak. Bakit? Kasi karamihan ng gamot pumunta ngayon sa adipose tissues. So, there's a sudden drop in the plasma concentration. Makes sense naman, right? Excuse me. Now, class, the rate at which the drug transfers from the blood to the adipose tissues, let's label that as K12. Meaning, movement of the drug, the rate at which the drug moved from the first compartment to the second compartment, which is the peripheral compartment. Alright? So, there's a sudden drop in your plasma concentration. Now, forever bang magsistay ang gamot sa adipose tissues? Okay, sabi natin class, di ba? Walang forever. So, sooner or later class, yung administered, ayan na, sabi yun, where is it? Okay, wala pala sa kabilang slide pala yun. Okay? So anyway, walang forever class. So ang mangyayari dito is, yung mga drugs na na-trap dito sa adipose tissues, sooner or later, ibabalik niya yun pabalik ng blood. Okay? At a rate of, let's call K21. So from the second compartment back to the first compartment. Unti-unti yun class lahat babalik. Okay? At pag bumalik na yan sa ating bloodstream, anong mangyayari sa fall ng gamot? Okay, so yung gamot natin here, babagal yung bagsak. Kasi, habang may na-eliminate from the blood, may nilalabas naman yung adipose tissues paunti-unti. Okay, kaya yung steepness ng line, yung steepness ng decline, less steep. Kasi, habang may na-eliminate, may binabalik naman kasi sa bloodstream. So, therefore, class, at this point in time, the decline of the second part of the blood, okay, will now depend on the back distribution. Okay, ito yung back distribution na yun. Okay, of the drug for tissues, excretion, and metabolism. So therefore, class, at this point in time, drug is already being eliminated. So yung KD natin, distribution rate constant, dito natin nakukuha yun. Okay, when the drug is distributing towards the, what do you call this? The second compartment. Okay? Then of course, class, once nandito na yan, gamot na yan, then it's ready for elimination. Okay? Kaya ganito ang itsura ng graph ng isang two-compartment model IV bolus. Alright?